Philippine nationalism is established upon visions of a collective state that puts the needs of its loyal people at the forefront. However, this simple vision is clouded by an intricate fabric of centuries consumed by colonial rule, state corruption, and authoritative neglect in regard to the national community. The country's history is said to involve 300 years in a Spanish convent and 50 years in Hollywood. Further, the country's national identity has perpetually been wielded, reconstructed, and defined by foreign powers. On May 1, 1898, the United States Asiatic Squadron under the control of Commodore George Dewey destroyed the Spanish Armada. In just hours, 3 centuries worth of Spanish colonization was sunk into the heart of Manila Bay. Although many Filipinos deemed the United States as the liberators from their Spanish oppressors, the victory led to 50 more years of an encroaching foreign power in the Philippines. During this time, the United States was asserting itself as a world power. The term coined manifest destiny was widely popular in the States and did not only apply to extending U.S. power to the far corners of North America, but beyond domestic boundaries as well. Thus, many Americans saw fit to colonize the Philippines and rework every aspect of the country in order to westernize these uncivilized people. The United States economy was flourishing, which motivated the United States' interest in foreign countries and their trade relationships. After the Spanish-American War ended, Filipino nationalists, led by the successor of Andres Bonifacio, Emilio Aguinaldo, declared independence on June 12, 1898. Having already successfully led the anti-imperialist group Katipunan against the Spanish in the Spanish-American War, Aguinaldo and many others were furious with U.S. intentions to further colonize the country, thus immediately beginning the Philippine-American War in 1899. This revolt was widely accepted as Philippine insurrection toward the U.S. and further achieved the representation that these incapable and savage people needed to be westernized. Because this was the first war as an autonomous state, the Philippines lacked necessary wartime resources such as outside support and experienced chronic deficiencies of war equipment. The Philippines lost the war. The defeat shattered much of the national sentiment and supported the idea that the Filipino people were indeed incapable of remaining autonomous without the backing of an imperial power. Thus, many Filipinos welcomed U.S. rule, as their new colonial power was regarded as a source of Filipino sustenance and protection. During the war, the U.S. still had immense influence within the Philippines. President William McKinley created a campaign called Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation, or the Policy of Attraction, which carried the slogan Winning Hearts and Minds. This proclamation was used to justify the annexation of the Philippines. It advocated for the betterment of mankind's condition. The idea of the white man's burden fueled the campaign in that the U.S. must maintain their presence in the Philippines to preserve order and drive progression. The proclamation had 4 intentions. The first guaranteed a substantial degree of autonomy with the help of the U.S. The second implemented social reforms and assured the education of all Filipinos. And third, it put procedures for economic growth into place. The last purpose of the proclamation was the impression it would have on the Filipino people for generations to come. This facet of the proclamation would secure Philippine-American relations by painting Americans and the proclamation efforts as salvation for the Filipino people and their newly independent and beloved nation, thus romanticizing the relationship between America and the Philippines. Parallel to the national values, the U.S. strongly believed that education was the ladder to a social mobility and a means of instructing the values, attitudes, and sentiments conducive to modernity and democratic behavior. This introduced public schools to educate all Filipinos. The U.S. also improved the country's infrastructure, transportation, and communication, which modernized cities like Manila. However, the proclamation's failures surpassed its successes. The proclamation did not fix social reform. In fact, it made it worse. It created a hardened social structure through implementing free trade and failure to fix the land tenure system. In 1946, the U.S. officially relinquished the position of directing the development of the country and its colonial power. However, the conditions of permitting the Philippines to become an independent state required several circumstances. These circumstances practically allowed the colonial relationship between the U.S. and the Philippines to continue. The first condition would guarantee money for rehabilitation efforts after the devastating impact of World War II in the Philippines, providing free trade between the two countries. The U.S. would essentially have the right to monopolize the Philippines for their exports. Because the U.S. specialized in manufactured goods and the Philippines specialized in agriculture, there was an assumed and contingent trading relationship between the two. The U.S. did not encourage the Philippines to produce their own products during colonial rule. Therefore, the Philippines could not immediately become self-sufficient in all realms of their economy. This ensured national dependency upon the U.S. even after the states ceded from the Philippines. The second condition would allow the U.S. to be given the same rights as citizens of the Philippine Islands. These rights included owning property and cultivating the nation's natural resources. Further, this structure favored big landlord business and discouraged small local business, which was disadvantageous to the masses in the Philippines even after colonial control. Moreover, farmers were naturally dependent upon the fees made by the landowner. Therefore, the remarkably expensive interest rates charged by the landowners would make it practically impossible for the cultivators to pay them on time. In fact, the debt was so extreme, it was estimated that in 1924, the average tenant family would have to labor uninterruptedly for 163 years to pay off debts and acquire title to the land they worked. This was called the Kusama system. The Kusama system led to even more systematic inequality amongst classes. Since there was a rapid increase in the Philippine population due to the progression in healthcare, the overpopulation led to the rapid overuse of the land and created a labor surplus. This led to landlord-tenant relations become weak. With the standard of living decreasing, landlords became corrupt by not paying their tenants the appropriate wage, as well as not providing tenants with goods and services necessary to work efficiently with the land. An example of the social issues in the Philippines was the development of the Nationalista Party. The party favored elected officials that belonged to wealthy landowning families, which perpetuated the inherited privilege in the elite. In response to the inequality of their government, the masses yet again mobilized, thus creating the militant labor and peasant leaders to manifest the socialist and communist parties in the Philippines. Like the Katipunan, the masses forged a national group called the Hukbalahap Guerrillas, or the Huk. Originally, the Huk was in opposition to the Japanese and fought to defend the country during World War II. However, after the war, instead of opposing a foreign invader, the Huk progressively transformed in order to challenge injustice internally, as the oppressors were now seen as the elite. The U.S. ignored the deeply rooted and organized inequality that the masses were faced with due to the agrarian traditions and elite superiority. Social justice was not important in the colonization of the Philippines because U.S. intentions to become a world power overshadowed the desire to help the Filipino people to become an independent and self-sufficient state. U.S. colonization still has an effect on the standard of living in the Philippines today. The proportion of households living below the official poverty line has declined slowly and unevenly from 59% in 1961 to below 39% in 1991, and around 36% in 1994. Urban poverty stood at around 23% in 1991 and rural poverty at 53%. This is a staggering statistic in comparison to the United States Census Bureau's 14% poverty rate in 1991. In 2012, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority, the National Statistical Coordination Board declared fishermen and farmers the poorest sectors of the economy. This clearly mirrors the colonial effect that the U.S. had on the development of the Philippines.